Tylenol and autism. This is the talk of the town this week. Tylenol, also known as acetaminophen or paracetamol in the United Kingdom. This week, the US administration made a massive announcement regarding a potential link between Tylenol consumption and autism, which is obviously a devastating illness affecting an increasing number of children every single year. And we're going to have an open, transparent discussion as three doctors on our thoughts and also the research behind why the administration is so concerned about this potential link. So let's dive right in then. And the first question to ask is this research which is revealing a link, is it solid or is it junk science? Dr. Ben, would you like to start off with that crucial question?
It's a great question. So there is a study that came out actually fairly recently where these prominent physicians looked at a large amount of studies that were investigating any link between Tylenol taken by mothers that were pregnant and seeing if there was a correlation with the development of autism spectrum disorder. What they found is they looked at approximately 47 studies and 26 of them found a positive correlation. So it's a very interesting study, and we can go through it a little bit more, but there did appear to be some sort of association or link there. That's for sure.
That is very interesting. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes, and that sounds like a meta-analysis, which is the most powerful study that can be done, where one looks at a number of different studies and kind of pools the results together. But the big question is, whenever you see that type of study, firstly, it's one study. I'm aware of some other research. I think Harvard had talked about this link before. The question is always, are we talking about a direct link or causation or an association, a correlation? And Dr. Peter, would you like to talk more about the difference between that?
Sure, that's so important, especially in this topic that we're highlighting. And so remember, a lot of these studies that were sort of observational studies, so people were observed over a long period of time. I mean, it was really not a specific study that was giving, people Tylenol to see if it caused autism or not. And so what we can say is there's a big difference between causation and association. So causation says we're coming out and saying it definitely does. Association is saying that, well, here's a red flag here. So we know that pregnant mothers who had possibly been taking Tylenol, there could be an increase, or there's an increased incidence of autism in that population of people. So we're not definitely saying it's causing it, but there's a red flag saying, is it doing it or not?
Okay.
You know, it's a good example that they used to give us when we were learning about this in medical school. They would say, we have found that people that carry lighters in their pocket have an increased risk of lung cancer. And so they would say, carrying a lighter in your pocket causes lung cancer. Now, that is an association, not a direct link, not a direct cause. So it could be the same kind of situation. And there are other confounding factors that women who have high fevers or that are in pain or that have other dysfunction tend to get higher doses of Tylenol, which also could be potentially leading toward this disorder as well. So that's, it's interesting.
That's a very good thought. And this is why it's so important. And we don't get enough of this, of doctors debating openly and talking about their thoughts. And things are really black and white in science. Now, obviously, the administration had seen a link there. And the question is, if we're talking about pregnancy and a condition that is as devastating as autism, is there enough to say, yes, there should be caution? Now, my own opinion is pregnancy especially, one should always be careful with any synthetic compound. The question is, do we have to go as far as saying you can never use Tylenol? Is there that much of a link? Do you want to talk? I'm glad that you mentioned about when Tylenol is used. What are your thoughts in general about synthetic compounds during pregnancy, and also whether we should always have, as the administration is doing, a very low bar for saying, be careful? Because my understanding is that RFK Jr. didn't say that there's a definite link. The terminology used was potential.
It's such a great question. What we know in pregnancy, one of the big problems, or the reason there's so many people being upset by this, is we really don't have very many medications that we can safely use in pregnancy. And the truth is, there aren't many medications out there that I would take at all without being very, very careful. I wouldn't take anything synthetic unless I absolutely had to, let alone when a person's pregnant and the fetus could be at risk. So I would say it is a good philosophy to try to minimize anything if you can when you're in a very vulnerable spot like being pregnant, or really in your life as a whole. I mean, I think that's a safe philosophy to take on. I also do like that the administration, this is one of the few administrations that has done this, is going back to the basics, looking at almost everything and saying, is this true? Is there evidence for this? Which is what we should have been doing forever with everything. We should always be investigating and making sure what we're doing is safe.
I tend to agree with you. I'm a big fan of asking questions, and I think it's great. But some of the reaction that we've seen online over the last couple of days has been insane. I mean, and it's become politicized, and this is always a problem. I have seen videos of pregnant women. By the way, should I say pregnant people? Is that the right thing to say?
Yes.
Kidding. With us, it's, yes, pregnant women, pregnant mothers. That's ridiculous political correctness nowadays, but that's another topic. But I will say this, I've seen videos of pregnant women online in the last couple of days, which are going viral, of them basically chugging paracetamol in defiance of President Trump. I mean, it's crazy.
I mean, unfortunately, it's become sort of a political football. And I think that's what we're seeing unraveling. And that's why we kind of want to highlight this, is that for years, pregnant mothers were told that you can't take aspirin, you can't take ibuprofen, you can't take really anything, but Tylenol is safe. And that's been the thought for decades. I know as a physician treating pregnant women, I don't want to give them anything, even just anything. And so to have that flipped upside down, I can understand why mothers and pregnant mothers are panicking. And because there's no other really good answer here, that what else can you take in the meantime? So we do know, and I always strongly believe that everything is really a risk benefit, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I see that there is a risk of uncontrolled fevers. I do understand that fever is important, right? So fevers are part of your body's natural immune response. And I think we've been trained as physicians to, every time anyone has a fever, you have to rush and take acetaminophen and Tylenol, as if it was like such a bad thing to have. In some cases it can, and it's dangerous. And uncontrolled fevers in pregnant mothers can be very dangerous. But it just highlights the bigger topic of just the risk-benefit ratio. We know that there is a risk of fevers and there's a benefit in reducing the fever. And so if you can keep the lowest effective dose and not abuse it, and I think that's a take-home message that I'm receiving, is if you're at risk, you don't necessarily have to avoid it, but you just have to be really mindful not to overdo it.
Yeah, I think that's key. Moderation is key. And I absolutely love what you said there, Dr. Peter, about the fever issue, because we are in a position where sadly the medical profession have become robotic protocol followers, and pretty much anywhere you go in a hospital in the United States, and I'm sure the UK is the same from what I remember. You get a call, patient is having a slight fever, let's quickly give acetaminophen immediately. And I'll have to make another video on this soon, but basically the body's immune reaction to increase the temperature is designed to kill the bacterial virus. So why would you be aggressive about lowering the fever? I mean, if it's through the roof, that's another matter. I tend to agree that there's probably a benefit of being a little bit more aggressive if someone's fever is really high, like 104, 105, but a slight fever. And plus, we live in a pill popping culture. So it's generally good. I mean, me personally, I will say nowadays, actually, I find doing something very natural often helps with a slight headache or fever. I mean, I'm a big proponent of turmeric. I myself take a turmeric capsule, and I find for me that can help alleviate some gentle symptoms. There's some anti-inflammatory effect. But at the end of the day, you have to be very careful, especially with synthetic compounds in pregnancy. Now, it would be the next step to say that young kids should also be careful with Tylenol. I have to check whether that was also part of the announcement, whether babies shouldn't be getting it either, which would take things to a whole new level.
Well, I think everyone should be careful with taking these medications to lower fever. I wholeheartedly agree with you. Very high temperatures are dangerous. They can even cause seizures, severely high temperatures, and other bad outcomes. However, low fevers, low-grade fevers, there is evidence and data that treating these low-grade fevers can actually prolong the symptoms and prolong the virus and prolong the effects of it. We have seen that. That's part of your natural response to fighting these infections.
When your body, increases the temperature and bacteria just don't grow well in those higher temperatures. And that increase in temperature activates a lot of the immune cells that are more responsive to fighting off infections. And so it's true, we've been so ingrained, and that's a medical school algorithmic culture that a lot of us are guilty of. And hopefully we can see this highlights a lot of the problem of just a very common medication that now the FDA has also flipped on it and are starting to change labeling on this, because they're finding that there's association. So what I guess the bigger question is also, what else have we missed, or what else is going to be out there released? Why did it take this long? There's other topics we can go on. Is it because it's not a trade medication? Is it generic? Was there money actually put into this that it didn't want to get exposed as this?
I think that's a fantastic point. Absolutely. And the question as well is, some of the reaction I've seen over the last couple of days is, what would a pregnant mother do for pain? Absolutely, we don't want anybody to be in pain, let alone a pregnant mom. But some of the discussion I've seen is as if this is a very powerful pain medicine. I mean, Tylenol is very gentle. If somebody's in a lot of pain, I don't think that Tylenol would even do that much. I really don't. Coming on to the next point from what you sort of finished with there about conflicts of interest, could there be any potential conflicts of interest? Did you dig anything up, Dr. Ben, from the research? Any of the doctors or scientists involved? We always have to ask the question.
So actually, there is a fairly large conflict of interest in the study I was discussing. So in the large study where they were looking at these multiple other studies and did find a correlation, one of the main authors actually has been an expert witness on a class action lawsuit against the producers of Tylenol, claiming that it did cause autism spectrum disorder. So that was his big conflict of interest that he did show on it, disclose on the name.
It's very interesting. Okay, well, that's a big deal as well. And these always have to be discussed. We will always be open and honest with you as doctors. We will look at data and tell you what we think. We'll, of course, have our own opinions, but that right there is not something I've heard on the news. So we are bringing you it right here on this podcast. You can look it up yourself. Yeah, exactly. Always have to ask about that. No side is immune. What are people's conflicts? So let's talk about the diagnosis of autism, because this is absolutely fascinating, because we've gone from a situation where the diagnosis of autism, the prevalence incidence was something like 1 in 30, 40,000. And then now we're in a situation where it's something like 1 in 31. And there's some regions where I've heard it's 1 in 12. What is going on there? Why have we got so much autism? This is a very valid concern from the administration. I don't remember this being addressed with so much vigor as we've seen. The question is it Tylenol or is it something else? Because this is a complicated diagnosis. What do you think of why we're seeing this explosion?
I think there's more awareness of it, and it's really, so obviously there is some environmental exposure that we're just not fully aware of. And I think that we see these associations with Tylenol. We talked about confounding principles about how women who have infections and fevers are taking more Tylenol. And it's going back to causation association. And there are some type of increase in environmental factors. And we know just in our culture of wellness today that there are just so many chemicals, processed foods, nutrition has gone down the drain. So there's just so many variables here. It's actually almost impossible to comprehend.
I think you're right. The problem with a complex disease like autism spectrum disorder is that it's probably multifactorial, and it can be very hard to pin down what's causing it. But I do want to tell you a little bit about the history of the diagnosis, and it has changed over the years. So in I believe it was mid-1980s, they came up with a DSM criteria, which is the criteria we use to diagnose certain disorders. And it was much more inclusive than it used to be. And we immediately saw a rise in the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. In the early 1990s, the U.S. Department of Education allowed autism spectrum disorders to be used to get extra services for the parents. And of course, you saw an increase in the diagnosis as well, because doctors wanted to help parents get more services for their children who are disabled. And then in 2013, we saw the DSM again increase the amount of diseases and conditions that were considered under autism spectrum disorder. And once again, we saw the rate spike. So there is an increased recognition. I mean, if you look at the data, that's certainly part of this. I don't think it's the whole story, but I think it's part of it.
I completely agree. I think that we live in a culture which wants to medicalize things, and there are other benefits, if I can put that way, of terminology coming under a diagnosis in terms of what people may get. And I'm not suggesting, obviously, the severe cases of autism, obviously, but I'm talking about it as a spectrum. And I tend to agree, when you have a very complex illness, it's very, very unlikely that you have one cause. I think it's multifactorial. It's not like, say, lung cancer obviously relates to someone smoking, or thalidomide producing birth defects, asbestos giving people lung issues as well. Those are obvious, very obvious toxins which lead to a very obvious toxic effect. I don't think personally that we can pin autism on one thing. Yes, absolutely, I agree that synthetic compounds are not ideal, especially in pregnancy. You have to be careful as well with young kids, although I will say, as far as I remember, I used to get given Calpol if I had a fever. That's a paracetamol in the United Kingdom. I remember that. If I was sick, not vast amounts of it. But I do think that we have a problem here. Those of you who follow me know that I'm always going to come back to metabolic health. And I think the metabolic health of youngsters now, by young, I'm talking about young women in their 20s, men too, but let's stick with women. If we're talking about an almost 50% obesity rate with insulin resistance and inflammation, to me, it's a no-brainer, no pun intended, that if you have so much metabolic dysfunction, that is going to increase the risk of an array of disorders in HR, because your mitochondria, your cells are not functioning. Can I tell you guys a crazy statistic that for the first time ever, because of our metabolic health catastrophe, we are now seeing babies born with evidence of fatty liver disease.
That's crazy.
What has happened? And to me, it's no surprise that illnesses like autism, other disorders are absolutely exploding now because of metabolic dysfunction in huge, unthinkable swathes of the population. Am I saying that it's all related to that? And we'll stick with autism. I'm not saying that. But I do think that this insulin resistance pandemic will basically affect every organ system.
Oh, absolutely. We know that children these days, 70% of their daily calories are through ultra-refined processed carb sugars, which is drastic increase of when we were young. It's crazy how it's really changed.
Well, it's interesting because we're talking about a possible link between Tylenol and a dysfunction of the fetus. We know there is a direct link between the mother being extremely unhealthy, extremely obese, diabetic, and uncontrolled diabetes, and having dysfunction in the fetus. So that is crystal clear. You're absolutely right. I mean, to me, that's problem number one.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like a deficit of logic in a way that, okay, I do support being very careful, but over the last few days, we've had a situation where mothers everywhere are super focused on this issue now, but yet let's tell the truth as it is, because it's the job of a doctor to be honest. Many mothers are guzzling down sugar and carbs and they're insulin resistant and not focused on that, but now thinking Tylenol. Now, a small amount of paracetamol, is it going to really do this? Should you never use it? That is a question. I don't think that we necessarily need to be that strict. Yes, be careful. But metabolic dysfunction is a major issue.
That's such a good point, Seal. We've really just politicized this whole autism versus Tylenol association. And that's unfortunate because it shouldn't be that way. And I think mothers are really just struggling right now to find out a reliable source of information because everyone has flip-flopping. And there's a lot of people getting upset that it was even brought up, which for me, I don't understand that people should be really informed and know really what they're taking. And so if there is any risk of any medication, of course it should be talked about. Was it presented in the right ways? That's up to everyone else to decide. But I do think that it's as you said, the degeneration and metabolic health. I mean, that's just so ubiquitous across younger generations. And you can't tell me that that doesn't have an effect. And you're right. People are so up in arms about Tylenol, but for years, it doesn't matter. Like, look at all the chemicals in the foods and the foods that are banned in Europe that are in the States now that we're okay with having. And suddenly this has become such a big political moment.
I wouldn't forget what's potentially coming out of this is that they are going to put a label onto Tylenol saying, be cautious during pregnancy. They're going to say, use the lowest possible dose you can. That's not exactly a ban. I mean, that still allows physicians to treat patients with this medication. It still allows patients to take this medication as needed. It's a word of caution. It's putting more caution on the label, which I think is an absolutely fine outcome of this. I don't have any.
Yeah, cautious, be very cautious. Is one Tylenol pill going to cause you immense harm? I'm not so sure about that. But let's talk a little bit about the novel therapy, which is now being discussed. And interestingly, if you go online, this has actually been talked about for a couple of years. And that is a compound called Leucovorin to treat children with autism disorder. Dr. Beth, would you like to talk a little bit more about the mechanism of action here and what the theory is behind this Leucovorin?
So this is a little bit complex, but actually really quite fascinating. So there was a great study that came out that showed that there are against the folate receptor in children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. As high as, I believe it was 70% were found to have these autoantibodies. And what that means is they cannot take folate and bring it into their CSF or the fluid in their spinal canal in their brain, which you need for development. Now, leucovorin is very interesting in that it is folinic acid. It's not folate. It's slightly different. And what it can do is it uses a different transport mechanism to get into this area. And the theory behind it is if we give this medication, these children that aren't getting enough folate in this area that's absolutely vital in their spine and brain for development will now be getting it. So that is the theory, the mechanism behind it. It's actually quite interesting.
Okay, so there is some solid science there. There's a deficiency if these receptors are not working properly, and they will get more folate using the leucovorin, which is a crucial B vitamin for neurodevelopment. Actually, that's commonly what B vitamins are used for. Are there any cardiac benefits of that you're potentially aware of, B vitamins?
Well, I mean, we know that B vitamin deficiency, you almost had me say B vitamins, by the way.
That would be a
B
win.
vitamins
To make Americans start saying
a decrease in stress response and cortisol response. People have low vitamin B levels, increase inflammation and heart disease. I mean, it's a known link for that. So absolutely, it's a really important part of your daily diet.
Really? Okay. So yes, and I believe that this is going to start being used more, leucovorin, for children with autism. And I understand that. I mean, parents are kind of at their wits' end and there's no therapy and there's some evidence so far that it might work. Let's wait and see. Time will tell. So leucovorin is also used in cancer therapy. Is that correct?
Leucovorin is often used to treat multiple conditions. So we tend to use medications like methotrexate and things like that when we're treating autoimmune disorders and other types of disorders. And leucovorin can be used simultaneously to help kind of replete some of the folate and decrease some of the side effects from it. But yes, we use it in those conditions.
Interesting. Now, I have seen some evidence, and in fact, I had a discussion with a very distinguished colleague of mine. Now, personally, I would like to see more studies because you have to be careful whenever you're dealing with children. But leucovorin actually can stimulate cell division. So I would want to know over the long term whether there's any potential increased risk of malignancy of cancer. If you're talking about any compound and you're giving high doses of it, especially to children, that would be a potential concern of mine. I understand why a parent would want to use it because there's really not too much else and the initial studies are promising, but it remains to be seen. Let's talk a little bit more about really the importance of testing medication. I mean, this was a concern of mine during the pandemic. Whenever you're talking about any new product which is being rolled out, you want to make sure, if you can, I know it's tough because time is of the essence often, that it's safe over the long term. I mean, how many medicines have we been wrong about over the years? And we found out years later that there's some spike in another illness.
I'd say we want to come across with the lowest effective dose. And I think that as a doctor and a father, I would always want to see more studies, more long-term data. So during the pandemic, we didn't have the ability, or we weren't allowed, I guess, to have the ability to have more long-term research on what was being given. So I really would just want to see, as a doctor, to prescribe, but also as a father to give more research, more long-term data on it. What is the safety of it?
It's so important. And RFK Jr., if on the off chance you are listening, or Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Marty Makari, I personally think Dr. Makari, Dr. Bhattacharya, you are fine doctors and were amazing during the pandemic. And I'm sure, as you mentioned many times, you are all for open science and fully researching everything. Long-term effects, like studies begin right now if we're giving this medication to children to help with their autism and get more folate into their brain. Interestingly, folate, of course, is heavily promoted as well as part of the prenatal for women, especially early on in pregnancy. And the question is always, I'm all for asking this question, the difference between a synthetic compound and people getting something naturally in food. My default is always to say, well, for millions of years, this was not used. So you just always want to be careful with something which is synthetic and not natural.
I couldn't agree with you more. I will say that my heart goes out to parents that have children that have this disability. And I also completely understand looking for anything that might help. So the fact that this is a possibility is very exciting. I hope it proves to be something that's effective in these children. I very much agree with you. We need to know it's safe in the long term and it doesn't end up causing more harm than good. Because if you look back through medical history, we've done that once or twice. So we just need to know it's safe. But I do applaud them for beginning to look into this. And I think this disease is getting the attention it deserves and has deserved for quite some time.
So true, Ben. I hope this political firestorm that's been caused now is channeled into a positive way and is channeled into research and funding for the appropriate ways and methods to get this medication out if it is helpful, or to find out it's not, but either way to go in a direction that's beneficial to parents and children with autism.
Very well said. I have two very smart doctor colleagues here, way smarter than me. So I'm letting their intelligence bounce off me. I want to touch upon one more point and then we will have closing statements. What do you two gentlemen make about why boys are more affected with autism and autistic spectrum disorder than girls? Is there any plausible mechanism? Why is that happening? We already know that there's certain communities which don't appear to have autism. A lot has been talked about in terms of the Amish community, many other countries. Now, some people might say, oh, it's because it's not diagnosed. Some others might say, well, we're way over-diagnosing it and we're medicalizing things, especially on the spectrum. But do you have any thoughts on that? Why would boys be more often diagnosed? Could there be something which is to do with fetal development there? So what do you think about that then, Dr. Ben?
Well, if you go by the autoimmune hypothesis, where the study showed that there were increased autoantibodies against the folate receptors, then you'd have to say that perhaps this group has a higher prevalence of this type of autoimmune disorder. So it's a little unclear to me why exactly, but my guess is it has something to do.
So something to do with the interaction maybe with the Y chromosome perhaps, but there's definitely such a huge difference between boys and girls.
Yeah, we know that boys, it can be up to a 4-to-1 increase in diagnosing autism. And so there's a couple of points here. Are females presenting differently with autism? Is it being masked? Are their symptoms different? So are we underdiagnosing it? That's one possibility. Is it the testosterone and male hormones that have a more predisposition for males to get autism? Do females have different genetic factors that buffer the onset or have more of a protective effect?
Yeah, very, very well said. Yeah, these are all theories. Okay, so let's have closing statements then. Our thoughts as three doctors. I would like to think thoughtful doctors about this association and where we go from here. Would you like to go first, Dr. Peter?
I think this highlights a whole basis of what I believe as a doctor is that everything that we do in medicine is a risk benefit. And I do believe that in some people, the benefit of Tylenol will outweigh any risk. And I think the panic mode that people are on hopefully will settle as more information comes out. I can say as a father, fevers and high fevers, I would be okay with low dose of Tylenol, the lowest effective dose. I think everything again as you respect.
But just as maybe a 1 or 2 time
Exactly.
dose. Okay. All right.
Well, like I said before, I'm just very happy that this disease and spectrum of diseases is getting quite a bit of attention. The attention it finally deserved. For a long time, it really wasn't. So I'm excited about that. I'm hopeful that no matter what happens, there will be some positive outcomes to all of this. I would also say be very careful with what you put in your body, regardless. Any synthetic substances, any medications, you should know everything you can about them and make sure the data's there. And as Sunil says, do your own research.
Well said. Okay, so my own thoughts on this. I think that the administration has done the right thing in enabling a discussion on this tragic issue. And I have a rule, because the medical establishment is so utterly terrible. Physician societies are terrible, set in their ways. They're not true people of medicine and science. Anything that gives them a ... up the backside, I'm going to be a fan of. And I've seen their reaction over the last few days. And I am all for a discussion. Now, do I think that Tylenol, acetaminophen, paracetamol is the cause of autism disorder? I would say very unlikely. There's very likely, more likely, a multifactorial cause to do with environment, to do with metabolic health. I don't think that complicated disorders have easy answers, but I'm all for, as you've alluded to, being very, very careful in pregnancy. Minimize synthetic compounds. Do I think that the odd acetaminophen is the end of the world if needed for really high fevers, or if that was the only thing? No, I don't think that's something that is an absolute, but everybody must weigh up their own risks and benefits. And I will always come back to metabolic health. We face an absolute catastrophe. That's a train there. You can hear it, which is cheering me on, I'm sure. The train again, our friend. But I so wish that much more emphasis would be put on metabolic health in pregnancy. I don't think that the world has ever seen anything like what's about to happen. You look at countries like the USA and UK, how many young women now, extremely metabolically unhealthy, are much more concerned about what that is going to do. If we have babies being born with fatty liver disease, metabolic dysfunction, pre-diabetes because their mothers are so unwell, then we're only at the tip of the iceberg. If we think autism is bad, which it is, then wait and see what's going to happen. Now, I don't mean to end with a pessimistic note, but that would be my thought on this very important topic. So as more information comes in, we're happy to talk more. We're making this emergency podcast to talk about this topic, which has been on the news over the last couple of days. We hope that you've got something out of it. Do check in the links down below for our natural health and well-being store. We are very proud of our expanding store and our latest additions, the organic premium lion's mane and our organic chai mix, the tea mix. And we've got some great reviews for that so far. So take care, everyone. Keep going. Keep your minds open. Keep learning. Stay strong. And we will see you next time.